Hello, I'm Richard Walker, with the fifth post in my series examining the history and background of the police who were faced with the Whitechapel murders, or what today are more often referred to as the Jack the Ripper murders. If you'd like to explore the Jack the Ripper murder sites, there are scores of Jack the Ripper tours listed online. My Jack the Ripper walk starts where the first of the 5 murders was committed. Numbers are limited to a maximum of 12 on any tour, and I use a radio microphone to deliver the story right to your ear. In my previous post, I looked at how much the Metropolitan Police Force and the City of London Police Force were able to cooperate by looking at the events surrounding the night of the double event, the night of September 30th, 1888, a night when each of London's 2 police forces were faced with a brutal murder. One in Berners Street, which for the Metropolitan Police was their 3rd murder in less than 5 weeks, all with very similar victims and all within a 20-minute walk of each other. One was in Mitre Square and was the only one of the Jack the Ripper murders that took place in the City of London. Looking at the way the 2 police forces operated on that night, it isn't obvious that a lack of cooperation was a major problem in investigating the crimes that were committed. However, if we look at how the investigation proceeded, there were problems, caused inevitably by the fact that detective work was still in its early years. Attitudes to eyewitness evidence were very different back then. Indeed, it's only relatively recently that the reliability of eyewitness evidence has been seriously questioned. The use of DNA by forensic teams has uncovered some glaring miscarriages of justice because of a reliance on eyewitness evidence. In the USA, the Innocence Project, founded in 1992, and has been investigating criminal convictions. By 2023, 318 convictions had been overturned. 18 of those convictions were men who were on death row. The Innocence Project website reports that eyewitness misidentification is the single greatest cause of wrongful convictions nationwide, playing a role in 72% of convictions overturned through DNA testing. In the UK, in 2009, William Mills was convicted of robbing a Glasgow bank. 2 police officers identified him from CCTV footage. 2 customers in the bank at the time of the robbery picked Mills out of an identity parade. 6 months into his 9-year jail sentence, DNA evidence from the scene was matched to a different person. Research has shown that it is a myth that we are good at recognizing faces. Only where we are very familiar with a person are we successful. We are poor at recognizing faces we have only seen briefly. Research also shows that while eyewitnesses can often be correct right after a crime takes place, the process of interviewing and questioning can contaminate their memories. Eyewitnesses are generally motivated by a desire to help, which can lead them to attempt to fill in the blanks or come up with information they are unsure about. The more times a witness is asked to recount what happened, the more likely their memories will become contaminated. In the previous post, the 4th in the series on the London Police, it is clear by looking at the night of the double event that a lack of cooperation between the 2 police forces was not a major factor in investigating the crimes of Jack the Ripper. The attitude to the testimony by eyewitnesses may have been more significant. Liz Stride, the first of the 2 women murdered on September 30th, was discovered by Louis Dimeschutz at 1 a.m. in the entrance to Dutfield's yard on Berners Street. Like Polly Nichols and Danny Chapman, her throat had been cut. But unlike them, there were no other mutilations. The police believe this was because the man who discovered her body, Louis Dimeschutz, had interrupted the killer before he could complete his work. The killer then hid in the shadows, and when Louis went in to fetch a light, he ran, filled with pent-up rage, to Mitre Square, where he murdered and mutilated Kate Eddowes. Inspector Frederick Aberline, his boss, Superintendent Donald Swanson, Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Robert Anderson, the Commissioner, Sir Charles Warren, and the newspapers all accepted this explanation, and it is the story that will be told by Jack the Ripper writers and tour guides today. The idea that two separate killers were out on the same night, each determined to cut their victims' throats, and each within less than an hour of each other and less than a mile from one another, would seem too much of a coincidence. The explanation for the murder was unambiguous. The police, the newspapers, and the majority of modern experts are clear about how these women became murder victims. Philip Soughton, in his book The Complete History of Jack the Ripper, states the case most succinctly when he writes, "Polly Nichols and the other victims, prostitutes all, accustomed to accosting men and taking them to dark and unfrequented byways and yards for sex, greatly facilitated his crimes." Eyewitness evidence about Liz Stride's activities in the hours before her murder fits with this story. Before looking at that eyewitness evidence, let's get an idea of what Berners Street and the area around it were like at 1 in the morning of September 30th, 1888. The first police officer to arrive at the scene of Liz Stride's murder, P.C. Lamb, was asked at the inquest if he noticed anything suspicious in the area, and he said he did not. He said there were squabbles and rows in the streets, but nothing more. Another witness confirmed that there were people on the streets around the time of the murder. Edward Spooner explained that between 12:30 and 1 o'clock, he was standing outside the Beehive Public House at the corner of Christian Street with my young woman. We had left a public house in Commercial Road at closing time, midnight, and walked quietly to the point named. We stood outside the Beehive for about 25 minutes. So there were couples on the streets at that hour in the morning that could cause confusion when it came to identifying the victim before she was murdered. Identification would be made more difficult because the lighting was far from ideal. There was a waning moon at about 1/3 of full brightness, and there'd been heavy rain that lasted till after midnight, so at 1 o'clock on that morning, weak moonlight behind 100% cloud cover would do nothing to aid visibility. At the inquest, the coroner explained that the parish plan shows that there are 4 lamps within 350 feet from Commercial Road to Fairclough Street. And Constable Lamb added, there are no public house lights in Berners Street. So the only illumination provided for the length of Berners Street, over 100 yards, was from just 4 gaslights. Visit St. James's Park on a cloudy night, and you'll see that the yellow glow from the gaslights is charming. Charming partly because the amount of light thrown from them is far less than from any modern electric street light. Against a background of less than ideal lighting conditions, 3 men gave their testimony on the 4th day of the inquest. William Marshall said that he saw the deceased at about 1:45 midnight. She was on the opposite side of Berners Street from where the body was discovered an hour and a quarter later. William Marshall said she was talking to a man 3 doors from his house. He said he recognized her by her face and her dress as the woman he had been shown in the mortuary. Now it's worth remembering that, quote, Research has shown that it is a myth that we are good at recognizing faces. Only where we are very familiar with a person are we successful. We are poor at recognizing faces we have only seen briefly. Research also shows that while eyewitnesses can often be correct right after a crime takes place, the process of interviewing and questioning can contaminate their memories. Eyewitnesses are generally motivated by a desire to help, which can lead them to attempt to fill in the blanks or come up with information they are unsure about. The more times a witness is asked to recount what happened, the more likely their memories will become contaminated. Close quotes. Then consider William Marshall's reply when the coroner asked if he could describe the man. He said, "There was no gas lamp near. The nearest was at the corner, about 20 feet off. I did not see the face of the man distinctly." If bad lighting meant he could not see the face of the man distinctly, why should we believe that he could see the face of the woman that the man was talking with distinctly? Immediately after this witness came James Brown, who said, "I live in Fairclough Street and am a dock labourer. I've seen the body in the mortuary. I did not know the deceased, but I saw her about 1:45 on Sunday morning last." The same caveats about William Marshall's evidence apply to James Brown's evidence. Immediately after James Brown claimed to have seen the victim, 1 hour after William Marshall claimed to have seen her, Police Constable William Smith told the same story. The coroner asked if he had noticed any man or woman in Berner Street. Constable Smith said, "Yes, talking together." He said, "I saw her face, and I think the body at the mortuary is that of the same woman." He was asked if he saw the man's face. He replied, "He had no whiskers, but I did not notice him much." Let's be fair. The job of a beat policeman was tough. Imagine spending your hours walking the same circuit of less than 1 mile in one of the poorest districts of London, and imagine doing it in the early hours of a dreary autumn night. Could you honestly say you'd be on heightened alert, determined to remember every face you passed during the long, weary hours? I've just returned from a walk to my local shops. I passed a number of men. But now, as I write this, I realise that I couldn't describe or pick out of a line any single man I passed, because, as Constable Smith said, I did not notice him much. Of course, if I were a beat policeman explaining to a magistrate the events surrounding the murder of a woman that took place in the middle of the tiny territory I was supposed to be taking care of, and the magistrate asked the leading question, "Had you noticed any man or woman in Berner Street when you were there before?" I might want to answer with something other than, "No, Governor, I didn't notice anything," even if that required a little creative thinking on my part. 3 eyewitnesses, with 3 separate sightings. 1 before midnight, 1 at 1:45, and a police officer who claims he saw the victim at about 12:30. 3 sightings that all help confirm the theory that the victim was a prostitute who her client murdered. 3 eyewitness testimonies that helped focus the investigation by the police on the single theory that they were looking for a prostitute killer. Other evidence presented by Constable Smith requires a close look, and that we will do in the next post. Thank you for checking out this post, and I hope I'll get to see you on one of my Jack the Ripper walks through Whitechapel.